want to bring in Cullen. I've been really looking forward to having you on because your journey as a student athlete has been super unique. It's one that I've been honestly kind of thinking about for a while now because nobody has had kind of the opportunity like you have had to play in different countries, different cultures, and then ultimately be back in the United States playing currently. But for the viewers listening in, do you mind kind of giving a brief introduction, your name, the sport that you play, and the school that you attend?
So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Cullen Freeman. I'm currently a sophomore at Bryant University. It's a Division I program in the American East Conference. I play soccer there, like as I mentioned, and I'm currently in the middle, or getting towards the end of my sophomore year.
So reflecting on your journey so far, I know only a sophomore, right? So you still got some time to be a student athlete, grow, and ultimately have that time to be a student, be an athlete, and achieve a ton of stuff. But so far, reflecting on the journey, how do you think that being a student athlete and the demands specifically have really shaped you both personally as well as athletically?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think for myself, I think it's really taught me a lot of lessons about, the importance of time management and priorities at the end of the day. I mean, I played two sports growing up, sometimes even three sports, and there'd be times in my life where it'd be like I had to learn time management at a really young age. I think, my parents really valued academics, and it was something that was kind of ingrained into me of I have to do well in school. And also, I was a competitive kid. I wanted to be as good as I could at, sports. So I think time management from a really young age was taught to me. And that's something that's kind of just carried on within my life in terms of, one of the biggest lessons I learned and just valuing certain things. And I think also going along with that, developing as a person, I think a lot of that comes with, again, valuing certain things. So, are you going to go out on the weekends? Are you going to take care of yourself? And just, the people I think you surround yourself with too. I think playing a sport, that's one of the biggest things it's taught me is that you have to surround yourself with people that are like-minded and honestly better than you in some capacity, whether that's athletically or just as a person. And I think for a long time growing up, I think I was like a lot of other kids in that, I was kind of afraid to be around people that were better than me, whether that be athletically or, just as a person, they were smarter than me or just knew more than me. And I think I've really come to embrace that now of just surrounding myself with people that, I can learn from in any capacity.
To your point, you're going to see the most growth with people who can actually challenge you and say, hey, I have all A's right now, and I'm in all these honors classes, whatever it is. And it's like, okay, cool. Like I should start associating with them if I want the best grades, like if I want to compete with them. Same goes athletically. But talking a little bit more, I know you already mentioned time management and how important and impactful that was as far as kind of balancing the academic life as well as the athletic life. And also what your parents kind of said, hey, Colin, we know how important academics are, right? Like that's such a huge part of your future. But balancing the academics with the athletics is very important, especially at the student athlete level. At your current university, has there been any resources that you've been able to tap into, whether it's, talking with other professionals on campus as far as, hey, I need to set up my schedule based on, my soccer schedule to make sure that my classes align well. I'm able to get enough study time in, get my homework done, and I'm just not going to be overwhelmed with my class load and my academic load. Has there been any resources like that, or has it kind of been all on you to say, hey, I'm really going to prioritize this on this day, this time, make sure that all my stuff is done? Or has it kind of been a balance of both?
I would say it's a lot of a balance of both. I mean, I would say that also too in saying that I'm very independent in that aspect. I think there's a lot of resources offered to me that I'm just very independent and don't necessarily partake in. I would say Brian does a very good job of at least putting their athletes in a position where to succeed. I have a counselor that, very much no one say decides my classes for me, but gives me a schedule and gives me the classes where it doesn't interfere with my practice times or anything like that. And then ultimately it's up to me at the end of the day to balance my schedule beyond that, whether I want to take, for example, Brian offers night classes. If I wanted to take night classes or classes right after practice, it's up to me. They also offer, I mean, Brian offers a lot of other resources. I mean, I could speak with a tutor or, get help on almost any assignment I wanted, which is a really great resource. And I think it's a resource a lot of athletes probably don't use enough here. They also have a mental health center where people can go speak to a counselor about, something that, whether it's on the field, off the field, whatever, those resources are available all the time. And in saying that, I would say I probably haven't used any of them that much. I very much have an idea in my head of, okay, when I want to do something or like, throughout my academic day. And, I'm pretty disciplined. I usually stick to that. But, there are all a lot of resources out there. And I will say I probably do speak to teachers probably the most. And maybe some of it isn't about time management or advice or anything along those lines, but rather just, help on an assignment or just bouncing an idea off them and just for me, that works very well because I have an idea of how to balance my time. But I will say Bryant does offer a lot of resources, especially for student athletes.
And I know you briefly mentioned it too at Bryant, specifically offering kind of those mental health resources on campus as well. Do you mind kind of touching on a little bit about how much you kind of believe mental health awareness is important within sports and, how it's played and had an impact within your own athletic career and journey so far?
For myself, I really believe that mental health is a huge, huge, huge piece of sports. I mean, I still think it's undervalued despite it being more prevalent throughout sports. I think it becoming more well known about just the importance of it. I mean, for myself, I wouldn't say I've necessarily had a lot of mental health issues, but I definitely have had challenges associated with it. And in terms of like your second part of your question there, just talking about how it's coaches or, just people around it feel like, I still think, progress can be made. I think my coach and my staff here, they do a good job of it, but I think throughout the country, I know that a lot of people still can do a better job of it. And I think it's difficult, I will say. I mean, it's a very much of a balance of sometimes the coaches can't relate because they came through a different generation. And I understand that too, a lot of coaches here, specifically for soccer in the US, came through systems or came through countries where it was kind of get up and get on with it. So they kind of had to build that mental toughness and mental resolve where they can't necessarily relate to the idea of like, you're having a bad day, just get on with it, or you're going through things on the side, just get on with it. So I think, there does need to be a balance, and I think there needs to be sometimes more awareness, but I do think there's been massive strides made, especially recently, and I think that top athletes and top coaches opening up about it and speaking about it only helps so much more. I think, I've been old enough to kind of see all of this through. I remember when guys like DeMar DeRozan and Kevin Love in the NBA were the first ones to kind of speak about battling depression and going through that as an athlete. And I think that's, especially in the US here, we've taken huge steps since then. I think so many other athletes now are comfortable opening up at any level. And, I don't think they feel like there's necessarily going to be pushback and they're going to be looked down upon. I think, they're actually going to be praised and, kind of viewed as heroes in a sense. So I think that's really cool to see for myself personally.
But talking a little bit more about challenges specifically to a student athlete, right? There's a lot of them that we might go through, speaking to injuries that we sustain, speaking to having to balance our athletic life with our academic and even our personal life outside of stuff. But has there been any specific challenges that you've gone through as a student athlete? It doesn't have to necessarily be at the collegiate level, but just in general. And how have you overcame those challenges?
I've faced quite a few challenges along the way and, my past so far and still kind of face some. And I think, for myself personally, and I think this is something a lot of student athletes can relate to, or a lot of athletes, is just putting so much of my self-worth in my performance. And I think, for myself personally, when I first went abroad, that was a really big challenge for me because I think it was the first time that I kind of realized like could have a future in this if I really pushed hard at something and kind of, I think that's every kid's childhood dream in so many ways. If they, really love a sport is, they want to play it to professional at the highest level they possibly can. And, for myself personally, especially when I went abroad during my gap year, it was soccer was kind of the only thing I had. And, I wasn't really doing anything else on the side. And it was extremely challenging for me to not put all my self-worth into the game. And it was something I really went through, and especially because I wasn't playing that well. So it was kind of I was putting all my self-worth and all my value into something, and I still wasn't doing it that well. And it was kind of like, well, what's my purpose? Like what if I can't even do this well and I'm putting everything I have into it kind of within my mind, like, what do I bring to the table? And I think something that really helped me, and I'm sure we'll eventually go in this direction, was listening to other athletes face this challenge as well of kind of, them dealing with the same challenges and the same kind of situations. And, that really helped me kind of drive on, and then also having a support system. But that for me, that's been the biggest challenge, and that's still something I deal with now of like, I put so much value into how I'm performing or like what I am as an athlete rather than what I am as a human being. And I think every single person kind of has that in some regard. I think if you're highly successful at anything and you value something in your life a lot, you're probably going to put a little bit of your self-worth into it naturally just because you're investing so much time and energy into it each day. And you obviously want to do it to the best of your ability. So I don't think it's something that's, unrelatable for just athletes. I think if you're a highly skilled businessman or whatever you're doing, if you put a lot of time and energy into something, you're going to kind of put your value into something. And in some ways, I believe that, you kind of should put a lot of value into it because that means you're really passionate about it. That means you really care about it. But, you also have to realize that you're a human being. And, being a good human being is your biggest purpose at the end of the day. And, that's something, again, I wouldn't say struggle with, but battle with myself. But I think for me, that's been the biggest challenge I've faced as a student athlete.
And so for yourself, I mean, I know you kind of briefly touched on it a little bit, but what was the support like, or I guess the support system for you like during those moments? Was it being able to rely on, your parents and kind of talk with them about some stuff? I know sometimes, when I was talking with my parents when I was in school, they were okay to help out on some certain stuff, but they can't necessarily relate to some of the specifics that I try and talk about when it's, related to baseball or sports specific. They're more of that high level, hey, everything's going to be totally cool, right? Like we're super proud of all that you've accomplished, but it's like, hey, I need some help as far as, gaining confidence going into practice or going into that game. Like, I don't think you're the right person or well qualified. Like you didn't play sports past fifth grade type of thing. So I guess what outlet were you able to use for kind of that additional support during those challenging moments, either, when you were in that gap year, when you were overseas, even when you're at Bryant currently?
Yeah, so I mean, I think I'll begin with this, kind of when it first started to really come up for me. It was during my gap year. And I will say I'm really fortunate. Like my dad played college soccer at a Division I level too, and actually in some ways had a similar path that I did. And that helped a lot during that time period. My dad went through a lot of struggles when he was playing and he could relate to a lot of things I said, having a lot of difficulty and having to come a lot of adversity in those early stages. And that was huge. And obviously my mom wasn't an athlete in college, but she cares so much about me. And, having both them available and kind of, having my dad being kind of able to relate to me and continue to push me on, and then also getting the love and support from both my parents, that was huge. And I will say I was also really fortunate during that time period to have, a really close friend there with me that, kind of also was going through something similar. I don't think he was at the time in the same maturity phase that I kind of was. Now I think he is, and we that's been really helpful. But at the time, it was just really nice to have somebody there with me that I considered like pretty much my best friend. Pretty somebody I could be vulnerable with in any capacity and not have to, think twice about it. And I also grew really close during that time period. I had two roommates. I grew really close with both them during that time period, and that was hugely helpful as well. And then also my coaching staff during that time period, I don't think I was as open with them, but they really took me, I think, under their wing during that time period. And I think, they realized how much I cared and how much I worked. And, for me, that was kind of the only thing I was still doing is I cared so much that that was like still all I was doing. And they embraced that. And I think really were there for me. And I don't think necessarily they realized it, but just having their support and just kind of having them show how much they care about me was huge during that time period. And now as I kind of progressed, it was still a lot of the same things. I think I haven't mentioned it so far, but I spent a year at a Division II school before I transferred into Bryant. And, my coaching staff during that time period was also huge. And I don't even think they necessarily realized it. It was kind of the same thing as like they realized how much I cared and how much, I wanted to get better and improve. And I think they embraced me again. They were a huge support system. And during that time period, and again, I don't think they realized it. And, I think during that first year I was in college, I was also getting a little better about capacities opening up a little bit more to my teammates and, just being a little more open and vulnerable about the stuff, the kind of the difficulties I was facing. That team at Franklin Pierce was extremely successful. They won the Division II national title that year, but I didn't feel like I had a big part to play in that team. And obviously, team success is so important, but I think every athlete, they want to play, they want to be on the field. So it can be a difficult balance. But I was fortunate enough that there was two or three people I was really close with on that team that were going through very similar situations, and we can kind of rely on each other during that time period. And then, I still have my parents. I think they still related. My dad still related to me and still provided me support. And I think as that time period, I was kind of maturing and blossoming too, and kind of coming to understand things. And now, kind of fast forwarding to Brian, it's still the same thing. I still have the same coaching staff I did at Franklin Pierce, and I've grown a lot closer with them, and that's helped a lot just because, again, we're a really successful team here at Brian, and I probably am not playing as much as I necessarily want to now, but they still make me feel really valued in other ways, and I think that's huge. And I think that's something I've learned so much from how important that is from a coaching perspective of making each player feel valued in some capacity and, making them feel like they contribute. And that's been huge for me. And then obviously I still have my parents that, help me a lot. And then, some of my closest friends too that also play that, go through their own difficulties and their own struggles. That helps immensely too. And just again, having people that, because my parents, can only do so much. Like, my dad doesn't play anymore. My mom, like I've mentioned, doesn't never played. So having people that are going through the same feelings I am at this time is huge. So I mean, I've come to kind of realize I have that support system in place and I've really relied upon it.